Are you feeling trapped by the invisible weight of the past? Haunted by relationships, memories, and pains that you just can't seem to shake? What if I told you that this suffering is not your fault, but a sign that you are on the verge of a profound breakthrough? The great psychologist Carl Jung uncovered a secret path out of this darkness, a journey he called individuation. It is the process of shedding the masks, the social roles, and the expectations of others to finally become the person you were always meant to be. But this path is blocked by the emotional baggage we refuse to put down. It's like someone who has spent years leaning on a cane. At first, it was necessary. It offered balance and security. But now your legs are strong, and the cane has become nothing but a dead weight, holding you back from your true potential. In this video, we will unlock Jung's most powerful teachings on how to finally let go of that cane. You will discover the secret to forgiving in silence and moving forward forever. Jung understood that this first step is painful, but he promised that it is precisely within this pain that your true, unshakable freedom is born. Before we dive into this life-changing knowledge, I need your help. A huge percentage of people who find healing in these videos are not actually subscribed to the channel. If you feel this is the message you've been waiting for, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the guidance that could change everything. And as we begin, give this video a like to help this wisdom reach others who are suffering in silence. Finally, I want to see how far these powerful teachings can travel. Please, write in the comments what city or country you are watching from, so we can see the global reach of Jung's healing wisdom. In any journey of transformation, there comes a time when we need to let go of what no longer makes sense. Jung said that this movement is part of the individuation process, almost like a rite of passage, in which we leave behind old ties to make room for a new version of ourselves. But letting go is not as simple as it seems. It's not just about cutting ties or forgetting the past. Attachment is something emotional, symbolic, and often unconscious. Sometimes we remain attached to a person who has been out of our lives for years, simply because an internal part of us has not yet been able to process what that relationship represented. It's similar to what happens when we keep a piece of clothing that no longer fits. You open the closet, look at the piece, you know you will never wear it again, but you can't donate it. This happens because the clothing carries a memory, perhaps of a special day, of a significant phase, of a piece of your history. What you don't want to let go of is not the fabric, but what it symbolizes. And with people, exactly the same thing happens. We maintain ties that have already lost their function because they represent something much deeper: security, belonging, or even a type of love that we would have liked to have received but never actually did. Therefore, it is important to understand that letting go does not mean rejecting. It is not denying the past or saying that none of it had value. On the contrary, true detachment is born when we can recognize the importance of the experience, be grateful for what was lived, and still accept that this cycle has already closed. It's like the tree in autumn that sheds its leaves, not because it denies life, but because it understands that this movement is natural and necessary. When Jung talks to us about symbols and archetypes, he reminds us that every end is at the same time a beginning. If we insist on holding on to what has already ended, we get stuck in the past and prevent the new from appearing. But when we let go, we create space for the unconscious to bring us other possibilities, new images, and paths that bring us closer to who we really are. This process appears in various situations: in a relationship that no longer brings peace, but that we insist on maintaining for fear of loneliness; in a job that no longer makes sense, but that we hold on to for fear of the unknown; or even in old beliefs that we have repeated our whole lives, but that no longer support our truth. Detachment hurts because it gives us the feeling of loss, but deep down, it is just the opposite. It is an act of transformation. Every time we manage to let go of what no longer serves us, we go through a rite of passage and take a step towards the self, that deep and authentic part of who we are. The challenge is to trust that by letting go, we are not emptying ourselves, but preparing to receive something new. A large part of human suffering stems from our difficulty in dealing with our own shadow. Jung said that the shadow is that hidden side of our psyche, formed by everything we do not want to see or admit in ourselves. It is the set of impulses, frailties, desires, and fears that we often prefer to deny. But precisely because we ignore this aspect, it manifests itself in a distorted way in our lives. A simple example of this is when we insist on being kind, patient, and understanding with people who clearly do not know how to value what we offer. Deep down, it's not just generosity. There is also an unconscious part that fears being rejected, that seeks acceptance at any cost. By not recognizing this fear, we remain trapped in relationships that hurt us, believing that enduring and giving without limits is the right thing to do. But this type of behavior prolongs suffering. When we don't recognize the shadow, it controls us. Unlimited kindness, for example, can hide a difficulty in saying no, a fear of being seen as selfish, or even an unconscious need to prove worth. And the more we deny these aspects, the more we get stuck in situations that drain our energy and distance us from ourselves. Jung insisted that looking at the shadow is not about becoming a bad or negative person, but about integrating what we avoid seeing. The problem is not in the shadow itself, but in the fact of leaving it hidden, acting behind the scenes. When we don't look at it, we become blind to our own limits. Suffering, therefore, becomes a warning. It shows that there is something in us that needs to be recognized. Every time we feel that we are giving too much and receiving nothing in return, that we are sacrificing ourselves for those who would not do the same for us, the psyche is trying to show us that something is unbalanced. This discomfort is an invitation to see what is happening underneath. Perhaps the need to please is speaking louder than self-respect. Perhaps the fear of being alone is guiding our choices. Or perhaps the idea that being good means never asserting oneself is keeping us tied to people who do not reciprocate. Integrating the shadow is precisely admitting these hidden motivations and learning to deal with them consciously. This does not make us weaker, but more whole. Recognizing that suffering has a root within us is the first step to stop insisting on giving our best to those who do not know how to receive it. Learning to say enough is one of the most profound acts of self-care. We often believe that setting limits is an act of harshness or selfishness. But Jung shows us that, in symbolic terms, establishing a limit is also a movement of psychic integration. It is the moment when we recognize that our energy is not infinite and that we need to protect it to continue growing. In practice, setting limits does not mean pushing everyone away or living in constant defense. It means understanding how far we can go without losing ourselves. It is when we can balance generosity with self-respect, the desire to help with the need to preserve our own emotional health. This gesture has enormous symbolic power because it represents the self-taking shape, asserting itself before the world. Many of us grew up believing that being good is never saying no, that loving is always sacrificing oneself, that friendship or family require enduring everything in silence. But this pattern creates a wound. Little by little, the person fades, empties themselves until a point comes where they can no longer distinguish who they really are. It is at this moment that the limit becomes necessary. It works like an invisible boundary that protects our internal space. By saying no, we are affirming I matter too. This symbolic act is more than an external gesture. It is an internal movement that shows that we are ceasing to live only to meet the expectations of others. And of course, setting limits is not easy. Guilt comes, the fear of displeasing comes, the feeling that we will be rejected comes. But precisely because it is difficult, the limit is so transformative. It marks the instant when we stop living for acceptance and start living for integrity. For Jung, this is a fundamental step in the individuation process. The psyche needs this internal order, this balance between giving and receiving, between opening up and protecting oneself. When we find this measure, we stop wasting energy trying to save those who do not want to be saved, and we can direct this strength to what really helps us grow. The limit, then, is not a barrier to push the world away, but a symbol of self-respect. It is the moment when the self asserts itself, when the shadow ceases to govern our attitudes, and when we begin to occupy our space with dignity. One of the greatest sources of suffering in human relationships is the way we project onto other people what we carry within ourselves. Jung explained that projection is a natural mechanism of the unconscious. We place on the other aspects that we have not yet recognized in ourselves, both qualities and defects. That is why we often believe that others think, feel, or perceive the world in the same way we do. The problem begins when we confuse this projection with reality. We begin to expect others to act according to our worldview, and when this doesn't happen, we feel frustration, hurt, and even betrayal. We expect empathy from those who do not know how to offer it, loyalty from those who never promised it, understanding from those who do not even see things the same way. This expectation is not born from a real commitment, but from the image we create within ourselves and place upon the other. It's like looking into a distorted mirror. We think we are seeing the person as they are, but in reality, we are looking at a part of ourselves reflected there. Deception then becomes inevitable because no one can sustain another's projection for long. This dynamic appears in many aspects of life, in romantic relationships, when we idealize the partner and then suffer when we discover that he does not correspond to the created image. In friendships, when we expect absolute understanding and feel abandoned when we realize that the other has their own priorities, or even at work, when we believe that everyone has the same commitment as us, and we get frustrated with the indifference of some. The mistake is to believe that the other exists to fulfill our expectations. This illusion distances us both from the reality of the person and from our own inner truth. Jung said that true transformation only exists when we recognize what is ours. As long as we project onto others, we fail to see our own issues. Perceiving and withdrawing a projection is not a simple task. It requires humility to admit that what we see in the other may, in fact, be a reflection of something we have not yet resolved in ourselves. But this movement is liberating. By recognizing that the other does not think or feel like us, we stop demanding roles from them that were never theirs. And at the same time, we begin to see in ourselves the aspects that need to be worked on. Projections, therefore, are not enemies. They are like arrows that point to what is hidden in the psyche. The mistake is to remain trapped in them, believing that the lives of others should align perfectly with our vision. The path of individuation requires crossing this veil, recognizing what is projection, and giving back to the other the right to be who they are. One of the most common illusions we carry is to believe that we can change people. We insist on talking, on showing, on trying to open the eyes of those beside us, as if it were possible to push someone towards growth or consciousness. Jung reminds us that this expectation is a mistake. True transformation never happens from the outside in, but only when each individual recognizes for themselves what needs to be changed. Many times we clearly see the other's problems. We see the repetitive patterns, the obvious mistakes, the way they hurt themselves and others. And at that moment, an almost uncontrollable desire is born in us to point the way, to indicate the solution, to offer the answer. But this rarely works because the psyche has its own time, and no real change happens before the person themselves is willing to look within. It's like trying to wake up someone who has not yet finished dreaming. You can shake them, you can insist, but that person will always go back to closing their eyes. Only when the dream cycle ends on its own does that person truly awaken. In the same way, no one transforms just because another said they should change. Transformation requires internal confrontation. It requires courage to face the shadow. It requires a willingness to abandon old patterns that, however painful they may be, still offer a sense of familiarity. How many times do we insist on spending energy trying to save someone? We try to heal, to advise, to carry on our shoulders pains that are not ours, and the result is almost always frustration. The other remains the same, and we are left exhausted. This happens because we confuse compassion with control. Helping is possible, but only as far as the other allows. To go beyond this limit is a form of denial. That change is a solitary process, and each person needs to walk their own path. Jung emphasized that the real work begins when consciousness turns inward. As long as we blame the world, parents, friends, society, we are still on the surface. Only when we recognize that the root is in us does something really transform. This movement requires brutal honesty, admitting that we are not passive victims of fate, but active participants in our own story. Therefore, waiting for others to change before we change ourselves is to remain trapped in illusion. The path of individuation requires this inversion, to look at oneself, to understand one's own shadows, to integrate what was denied, and only then to live more wholly in the world. And even so, this change is not definitive. The psyche is alive. It is in constant motion, always asking for new adaptations, new adjustments, new internal confrontations. True transformation is not a final state, but a continuous process of self-knowledge. And it never starts from the outside. It always originates from within. Psychological freedom is one of the most precious gifts we can give ourselves. Jung said that much of human suffering arises from dependence on the approval of others, from the need to live to meet the world's expectations and not our own. When we manage to free ourselves from this, we feel for the first time the true autonomy of the self. Psychological freedom does not mean isolation or indifference. It is not becoming cold or disconnected from the world. On the contrary, it is living in full awareness of who we are, without the fear of external judgment dictating our choices. It is being able to look inside and know that our decisions do not need constant validation, that we can listen to our own voice without fear of making a mistake. Many times we allow ourselves to be imprisoned by the opinion of others. We measure our worth by the reactions of others. We seek acceptance where there is only expectation. We conform to standards that are not our own. This invisible prison drains our energy, distances us from authenticity, and prevents us from walking at the pace of our own lives. Jung reminds us that breaking these chains is an act of courage, but also of self-love. It is recognizing that one's own mind, one's own heart, and one's own history deserve respect. This freedom also allows us to observe without judging. When we are no longer tied to the approval of others, we can see relationships, situations, and choices more clearly. We can distance ourselves from people who harm us without guilt, simply because we understand that preserving our integrity is essential. We can make important decisions, even if they contradict external expectations, without it causing us constant anxiety. The process of individuation largely involves this achievement. Every step towards internal autonomy is a victory over fears, projections, and inherited patterns. When we free ourselves from the need to please, we begin to occupy our space consciously, to live according to our own truth, and to recognize that our existence has value in itself, regardless of anyone's approval. This freedom, then, is not just about external choices. It is about the internal peace that arises when we accept who we are and allow ourselves to be. It is the moment when we stop being hostages of the world and start being responsible for our own destiny, aware that life is, above all, a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, between our essence and everything that still needs to be integrated within us. Missing someone is a natural and inevitable experience, but Jung warns us that longing does not always mean we need that person back in our lives. Often what we feel is just the activation of a complex, an emotional memory that has not yet been fully integrated by the psyche. This complex can arise as nostalgia, intense memories, or feelings of emptiness, but it does not necessarily indicate that we should resume a bond or relive the past. Longing is, in fact, a reflection of what still dwells within us. It shows us unresolved aspects, desires, or needs that we need to understand before moving forward. It is as if the psyche sends us a reminder. Look inside. Understand what still needs to be integrated. Ignoring these signs or trying to fill the void with the presence of someone who is already gone rarely resolves the issue and often prolongs the suffering. This does not mean that longing is negative. On the contrary, it is part of the individuation process. Jung saw complexes as elements of the psyche, which can be sources of growth if recognized and integrated. Missing someone is an invitation to look at ourselves, understand our emotions, and realize which aspects are still out of balance. It is a moment of introspection in which nostalgia ceases to be just a sentimental memory and becomes an opportunity for self-knowledge. In practice, this appears in everyday situations. We remember an old relationship and feel a tightness in our chest. But that doesn't mean we need to go back. We think of a friendship that was lost and wish to rescue the bond. But often what we need to rescue is our own ability to welcome and understand these feelings. The past then functions as an internal mirror, reflecting what still needs attention within us. Integrating longing is, therefore, an act of consciousness. It is realizing that missing someone is not a weakness nor a sign of dependence, but a natural process of our psyche organizing itself. By accepting longing as part of the path, we stop chasing external ghosts and start working on what really matters: the understanding of ourselves, the acceptance of what has passed, and the creation of space for what is yet to come. And so, you now possess the key to one of life's most profound acts of power: forgiving in silence and reclaiming your freedom. What the world might see as retreat is, in fact, your ultimate liberation. As Jung teaches, this silent choice is a conscious act of profound self-respect. You are no longer allowing your precious psychic energy to be drained by conflicts or people who do not deserve it. Instead, you are redirecting that powerful flow inward to cultivate the person you are truly meant to become. This silent integration dissolves resentment, not by denying the pain, but by understanding that the energy once wasted on anger is the very energy you will now use to build your own destiny. This isn't weakness. It is the quiet, unshakable strength of a maturing soul that no longer needs external validation or applause to heal. By choosing silence, you choose to let your psyche reorganize, strengthen, and carry you forward into a lighter, more conscious life, closer to your true self. If this message has unlocked something within you, I ask you to make it real, to seal this intention. Comment below with the simple, powerful words, "I choose my peace." Let this be your declaration. So many souls find this channel, watch until the very end, but are not yet part of our community. If that's you, please take this one moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your journey into the self is just beginning, and our future videos will go even deeper. Don't miss them. And finally, if this guidance has served you, press the like button to help this light reach others who are still searching. Thank you for your courage to look within. Until we meet again, walk in your newfound power.